Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you back to another Arkans Alternatives. Today we are going over our Part 2, a comparative review and a Star Wars Battle Droid analysis. As mentioned, this is going to be a comparative review, something we haven't done on the channel before. So let's jump right into it. What is a comparative concern review? Essentially, what is this review? What does this mean in the context of our videos? Well, let's first go into what we're looking at here, and then I'll talk to you about how it's going to work for the review part. What are battle droids? Well, in Star Wars, they are generally a cheap, reliable, durable, automated, or minimally/relatively independent militarized force of combat robots. These are genuine robots. No cyborgs here, no human brains stuffed inside of a metal sarcophagus, no person controlling them like a drone. There's a centralized computer or a series of robotic brains, essentially hyperprocessors, that are being used to get these soldiers to work and function. Highly complicated, many different processes to create these things, but we'll be looking at the basic ones. These are used heavily by industrial firms like the Trade Federation, and eventually the Confederacy of Independent Systems, the CIS, during the Clone Wars as troops, as primary troops, as infantry. Generally, we think of like robots in terms of a lot of different settings, and they're either a common thing that exists everywhere, or they're a more elite thing like a battle beast or a war robot. Droids are the opposite. They are cheap, lowest bidder, military grade, which means not very good, equipment. Very much so they are equipment rather than true soldiers, even if they may act like it or look like it. So they're used as primary infantry by the CIS and by the Trade Federation. What then are droid brains? What controls these things? Well, they used to be controlled by a central computer. If you've ever watched The Phantom Menace, I am a big fan of that movie. If you ever watch The Phantom Menace, you hear about the central processing computer, a big brain in orbit that controls all the droids and tells them what to do. Without that brain, they just deactivate, and that's what happens at the end of the movie. Sorry, spoilers for a movie that was made almost before I was born. But moving away from that central computer is something that is being consistently done by the Trade Federation and the CIS because, well, that's a giant failsafe problem. If somebody blows up your central computer, all of your infantry just die, and most of your tank commanders and crews as well just die. You lose, essentially, automatically. And since these things are, not incredibly expensive on an individual scales, but in the tens of millions in which they are produced, they become quite expensive, and so having a whole bunch of them get knocked out at once is no longer acceptable, so they move towards independent battle droids that could be controlled by complex computerized drives that essentially automate them. These drives, again, like the processor or the driver in your computer or phone, are droid brains. Now, these brains are not normal brains. Again, they are not organic in any way. They are just a series of processors similar to how we would look at something like an old-fashioned computer processor, or maybe even a very basic AI, a learning computer. Very basic, very limited, kind of limited by the sheer package that it's in, and also by the inability to network. There's no internet, so this AI or battle subroutine of computer systems or computer programs is what controls the droids. They act independent, they are seen as independent, but they are still automated by this droid brain. Essentially, it gives them orders and acts on commands rather than them really making decisions. It may seem like they're making decisions, and some of the ones, the more advanced droid brains, the ones that will eventually come into the series, they are genuinely independent, and you can reprogram battle droids to be fully independent, but in general, they are slaved to some basic protocols like doing what certain people say, and trying to kill things if they're automatically programmed to try and kill them. That kind of basic combat stuff that you would need out of a robot that you wanted to be murderous. Star Wars blasters. I already went into this a little bit in the other video, but now we're going to go into it in far more detail in this part 2. They're split into class and size. Split into 3 classes and 3 sizes. For classes, you have vehicle blasters. Again, blasters being different from lasers and being different from ion weapons. Ion weapons in Star Wars knock out shields and energy fields like an EMP pulse, generally, or they disrupt them in some way. Blasters, or lasers, in the Star Wars universe as we know them, are packets of ionized hydrogen or other gases, essentially a plasma, bolt, or slug coming out of the weapon, striking the target. It's usually a lot less than what we'd consider a normal plasma weapon, something like 40k. It's like less than a third of that. It's smaller than even like Tau weapons. And then you have the vehicle version of that, and then you have heavy versions. So this is something that couldn't be used by a single person. They're used on smaller droids on mobile platforms as like light vehicle weapons, and then infantry weapons. So those are the classes. So you could have a blaster that is an infantry class and a size 1, or size 1 or 2, which is like pistol or rifle or anti-armor specialized. So there are 3 sizes to fit the 3 classes. So vehicle, heavy, or infantry are the basic classes, and then the sizes are pistol, rifle, or anti-armor, or specialized. Pistol is, again, anything that's a pistol. You might say that the standard weapon of the droid is a pistol. It's not. It's actually a rifle. The difference is essentially whether it's used with 1 or 2 hands. Pistols in Star Wars can be very small, Derringer-sized, and still pack enough punch to kill a human or a droid fairly easily, just at close range. Rifles, on the other hand, are essentially anything that takes 2 hands to use, and even some weapons that look like they might take 1 hand could still be rifles. For example, the E5, the heavy blaster that the droids use, is still a rifle, because even though it looks like a pistol, it's kind of on a built-up pistol chassis, it has rifle power behind it. So it's almost like caliber in actual kinetic rifles. It's just bigger, moving faster, more plasma being shot out. And then anti-armor specialized. There are anti-tank variants for the droids. For example, one of my favorites is the B2HA over here. Essentially, it has a missile launcher as an arm, or a big plasma gun as an arm. This allows it to knock out tanks and other heavy infantry. There's also specialized weapons, specifically ones that are built with heavy, fully automatic fire. But in any and every single case, you can combine the classes with the sizes. So you could have a vehicle pistol weapon. What does that really mean? Well, it would mean a regular weapon that could be used by infantry that is mounted on a vehicle, something like a blaster that's just been jerry-rigged up to a vehicle. You could have a vehicle rifle caliber weapon, which would be something like a secondary weapon, like a pintle weapon or like a coaxial weapon. And then you could have vehicle anti-armor or specialized weapons, fully automatic, heavy anti-infantry, and just vehicle anti-armor weapons in general. Heavy, same thing. There are heavy pistols. There are the much bigger versions of pistols that are used for anti-armor work. You see a lot of these with individuals like Cad Bane. That's definitely a specialized or a heavy version of a pistol. Heavy rifles. A lot of the sniper rifles that droids or clones use could be considered heavy rifles. And then, of course, heavy anti-armor or specialized blasters exist everywhere. They are all over the place, and a lot of them could be considered like heavy infantry weapons, like support weapons, like the big blasters that they use on Hoth to take out vehicles. Then infantry, again, same thing. Infantry pistols, infantry rifles, and infantry anti-armor or specialized weapons. It's generally how it breaks down. You can go even higher. You can separate the classes into 5, into 6, into 12. You could say they don't or do work together. Your choice. That's just how I tend to break them down. So, with that all understood, with that basic premise out of the way, comparative reviews. We will be logicking the absolute hell out of this lore. We will be going over the basic job of 5 different types of droids that existed within the universe, and we will be telling different factions from other fandoms how to deal with them or things to be concerned about, which is why I call it a comparative concern review. What does a guardsman, a space marine, a helldiver, and a modern soldier care about, or how do they go about combating the problems of X or Y droid? So we'll be logicking the hell out of this. We'll be focusing on individual specific things that are different and things that are special about these units. So let's start with the B1s, the basic battle droid, the good old B1s. They are mass wave infantry. The quote that goes along with them, and this is a kind of a derogatory thing from one of the extended universe comics, is that the B1 battle droid on average has a 37% lethality rate, meaning that assumedly for every 100 droids created, only 37 will actually get a kill before they are knocked out of combat. which is not the kill-death ratio that you would like for your units, but it makes sense. They are mass wave infantry. They are not designed for subtlety. They are not designed for kicking in doors. They're not designed for flexibility. They are very basic. Their brains are basic, and they are unbelievably cheap. Now, Dooku says in the episode from the Clone Wars, those battle droids are expensive. He's bullshitting. They're not very expensive at all. These are incredibly cheap. They're cheaper than industrial equipment a majority of the time. Their cost relative is extremely low. They are bargain bin. Body armor, barely any. Protective equipment, barely any. Weaponry, the cheapest that they can find. Actuators and mobility, as cheap as it can get. Skinny, thin, and lightweight. Making the B1 unbelievably cheap and able to be fielded in ungodly high numbers, to the point where that 37% lethality rate is a lot more of a problem, because the 37% chance of dying when you come across one of these things becomes a bigger issue when there are about, 200,000 of them to the 10 or 20 of you in your squad. So, primary or alternative armament. They have E5 blasters, again, that heavy pistol variant that is still using rifle caliber plasma, class 1, size 2 type thing, and that's going to be the basis that we're going to be using for a lot of different blasters in this. It is capable of carrying anti-tank weapons, but there is not a primary variant of it that only uses AT weapons. The standard B1 and the Grenadiers and all that stuff, they can all use the shoulder-mounted rocket launcher that the CIS tend to use, but it's not a standard equipment that they're all given, or that they all have access to. Most of them just have a standard laser rifle, the E5 blaster. So, things to consider when fighting a B1. Let's go through the list. If you're a guardsman, the biggest concern that you have is the fact that this is not an enemy that you want to fight in close combat. The droid, while persistent and while relatively accurate at close range, has some serious disadvantages when compared to the Imperial Guardsman. The Imperial Guardsman's lasgun can pretty effectively knock down a battle droid with 1 to 2 hits, especially if they hit them in a joint or if they hit them in the head, which, considering the relative speed of a battle droid in comparison to a human being, absolutely possible. Turn the lasgun on to full auto, just hit it 5 or 6 times, and you'll probably put it down. They're not heavily armored whatsoever, and the armor that they do have is absolutely penetrable by standard lasguns. You had something even more powerful than a single shot would do the job right through the chest. With a normal lasgun, 3, maybe 4 shots if you want to really guarantee a kill, especially at longer ranges. But close combat is useless. Not only is it the place where the droid is more effective against you and its weapon can be brought to bear with more ease, but also the fact that you're not going to stab a droid to death. It can be done, but it is not nearly as efficient as doing it with any other enemy that you're going to fight that has blood. So, uselessness of melee, generally your biggest problem. In every other way, the Guardsman is fairly superior to the battle droid. If you're talking about actually getting hit by the plasma blast, by that tiny little blaster bolt, not tiny, but like by the blaster bolt, most guard flak could probably take a single hit, but you're likely going to be injured afterward. If you have full flak, the kind with thermal protection at the front, the ceramite layer that I've talked about in my body armor videos, you're much more capable of tanking one of these E5 blasters to the chest and not dying instantly, as your armor is probably objectively better than that used by clones or by stormtroopers. Next up is Space Marines. Sorry, we're doing 2 for 40k. We are a 40k channel. I gotta do what I gotta do. Space Marines. The really biggest issue here is their sheer numbers and the fact that they have no morale. For the Guardsmen, you can maneuver around, you can do different objectives, you can distract the droids. For a Space Marine, you generally gotta go right at them, because Space Marines don't really have the ammunition supply that a Guardsman does. They have much more limited ammo. They are limited to probably 90 to 120 rounds, where the Guardsman has well over 200, and multiple squad mates who will probably have backups. So, the Guardsman has more ammo, the Guardsman has more time, Space Marine does not. Which means that the Space Marine has to engage directly with the droids, which means that 2 things come into effect. 1, the droids have no morale. You're not going to break them, they're not going to run. They're not going to lose to army losses, they are going to keep coming wave after wave, droid after droid, until you are eventually wounded down to death, and then they will execute you. The other thing that comes with that is the sheer numbers. Individually, with the individual weapons that they have, droids, B1s, not a threat, not a problem. A Marine could knock one out with melee, because they are that strong, a Marine could also easily shoot them to death with the bolt gun with a single shot, most likely. Maybe two if they really needed to. Problem. The thermally conductive layer on their armor is very thick, but they are also a much bigger target than a guardsman. And while they are fast, bigger target, moving at a distance, this creature can definitely track them and shoot it pretty well. So being out in the open, being forced into closer combat than the guardsmen, being forced into more direct combat, you have to worry about more about the sheer numbers of that wave of infantry than the guardsman does, because you have more vulnerability in your combat style. So the droids, you're going to be able to knock out way more of them, but you are going to probably suffer a lot more chip damage, whereas the guardsman can't really afford chip damage. It's going to be 1 to 2 shots if he dies. You can afford a couple of shots. Bigger problem is just your armor getting damaged or ruined. This is plasma. It has the ability to melt metal. Lots of sections of your armor are made out of metal. Plenty of your underlayer or underweave armor is made out of metal. So while I consider it, kind of on par with using a hell gun against Marines, I am still of the opinion that hell guns are pretty effective against Marines. So reasonable. Arguably, this would have even less penetration than the hell gun, but I will leave that up to other people to discuss. I think that it would have less penetration than the Hellgun, but slightly more damage. Next one up is the Helldiver from Helldivers. What is the biggest issue that the Helldiver would have with the B1s, trying to knock them out? This is your standard clanker. I mean, if you fought the automatons, you've probably fought something that's about equivalent to a B1. Maybe a little bit slower firing, a lot less accurate, but still fairly analogous to what we fought before on the bot front. The big thing is that there's restrictions to mobility for the Helldiver that they're not used to. Most Helldivers fight in relatively open terrain and attack relatively poorly fortified enemy locations. Again, I say relatively. It's not fortresses and bunkers generally. Even on the automaton front, their bunkers are pretty terrible, and their walled putty fobs are very much vulnerable to just getting sniped out of, and the automatons are not very good at identifying where snipers come from. I'm not saying the B1s are much smarter than the bots, but a little bit more smart. They can kind of put together more military tactics, especially if there's a tactical droid in charge of them. So your biggest problem here is going to be the restriction of mobility. The fact that there are far more B1s in any combat than there will generally be of bots, and they don't necessarily rely on other forces to kill you. All they really need is to land a couple of good hits, and quite frankly, I think that the B1s are more accurate than the bots most of the time. Not a great advantage, but 37% as to opposed to, let's say, 30% maybe. Again, it depends on the difficulty that you're playing Helldivers at. Again, with the Helldiver, with the level of armor that the B1 has, I think that even light armor penetrating weapons, just like in Helldivers, will damage them and probably kill them, even though they are kinetic weapons. So, not a real big problem. But my biggest issue is just the restriction of mobility, the fact that droids are going to be indoors much more often, and they'll be able to set up in more effective defensive positions that the Helldiver is going to have to assault or use stratagems to get rid of them. The modern soldier. Now, when I say modern soldier, I mean a generic, from any country in the world, circa 1990 soldier. He has decent Kevlar body armor and a Kevlar helmet. He's got gas mask protection. He's got a intermediate cartridge firing rifle, a 5.56 firing rifle of some kind, and an ACOG scope or something of that nature. A modern soldier from the 1990s. The biggest advantages and the biggest concerns that the modern soldier would have against the B1 is the enemy's intelligence. Now, a modern soldier can play around the B1. They are smarter than the B1 inherently. They are more capable of tactics. They are better trained objectively than the B1 is. However, enemy intelligence with the B1s is something that you have to be concerned about. These are not humans. They don't act like humans. Again, in this scenario, we're assuming that they've engaged with them before and it's not the first time they've come into contact with them, but even for the modern soldier, sharing of information in the combat space is important, and droids can do it basically instantly. When a droid engages with a unit, if they have an officer around, they will do exactly what you will do. They will call in the encounter, and they will describe it via communications. A lot of other bot creatures And in fact, other enemy units don't do this. They don't call in as effectively and they don't communicate as effectively. B1s do. The only other thing I'd really worry about as a modern soldier is the physical armor. The fact that you have to actually destroy the creature rather than wound it or break it or something like that, the fact that you actually have to blow its chest open or break a joint or limb, and the fact that it can continue operating after an injury like a blown off arm or a broken leg, it's going to take some time to get used to, but 5.56 is still quite capable of damaging the B1. Now, I think it's definitely going to take like 10, maybe 20 shots, but squad of modern soldiers versus a squad of B1s, I think the modern soldiers probably drop them just from sheer rate of fire. Big problem, their rounds are likely to kill you 1-to-1, so don't get hit, but you're just as mobile as the guardsman, so you'll honestly have the same advantages that he will. Moving on to the B2. Honestly, one of my absolute favorites. I love the B2. These are B2 battle droids. General purpose is they are an armored mass wave infantry. So the same thing as the B1, but slower, dumber, tougher. Not necessarily dumber, I just like to use that as an affectation. Sometimes they're described as less intelligent, most of the times they're just described as a lot slower. There are two general variants to these guys. I call them the slim, thick guy, and then the big boy. The big boy is absolutely freaking huge. He's massive, heavily armored, layered in armor protection, and you can kind of see the remnant of the B1 head, indicating that this basically has the same kind of droid brain, plus an extra eye. It's one of my favorite things about this one. It's got a little extra eye that it can use in case its primary photoreceptors are damaged or destroyed. But its mentality is essentially the same. The B2 works the same way as the B1. It is a massive wave of standard basic bog infantry with regular weapons. It's just got a little bit of modification that makes it slightly different flavor. Relative cost, 2 times the B1. It's twice as much as the B1. It's more material. The material's a little bit better. It's actual armor this time. It's got more weaponry. Usually it's a double blaster on one arm cufflink, but sometimes it's on both arm cufflinks. Just depends. However, even at 2 times the cost of a B1, they're still very cheap. If the B1 is dirt cheap, bargain bin garbage, the B2 is still dirt cheap, but not bargain bin garbage. So it's just a little bit better and a little bit more expensive, meaning that they're going to be more like elite squads or studs for normal squads rather than a standard foot troop. Primary and alternative armament, it's got the same dual blaster, arguably essentially the same exact thing damage or class-wise as the E5, so it's just got 2 of them. The other thing is, again, it has that arm-mounted anti-tank, that B2 Ha. There are other versions of it. There are, of course, rocket versions of it. But the main thing that you have to worry about is that dual blaster, essentially giving it twice the firepower of the standard B1. Almost exactly twice the firepower. So, what then do you consider when you're fighting a B2? As a guardsman, now you have to worry about durability. These things are tough. You have to disassemble them. You have to destroy the major upper part of the torso and head, and that's really well armored. As having a las gun, there are a couple of weak spots. Aim for the gut, aim for the arms, and aim for the legs. You want to aim for joints, not for the actual material, because shooting this thing in the thigh isn't going to do much, but shooting it in the knee will disable it. Gut, pelvis, wrists and elbows is a solid plan. Head and photoreceptors is probably going to be another way to disable it, but if you want to actually kill it, you do have to really blow the torso apart or crack it, shatter it in some way, and penetrate into it. With the las gun, that's a hard ask. You're going to need multiple shots in the same place. Turning it on auto and just spraying the B2 is a pretty good way to disable it, but it's not an efficient way to kill it, and it's going to cost you way more in terms of ammunition. The other thing is now you're talking about an enemy that actually can fire quickly and can match or exceed your rate of fire depending on what weapon you have in the Imperial Guard. So now you have to worry not only about being out of sight and being mobile like you did with the B1 and just knocking them out guerrilla style, now you have to worry about cover, about personal protection, because you're very unlikely to just take a single stray round from the B2. There's a pretty solid chance that you get hit more than once, and that could be a death sentence or a maim. So mode bit durability, dealing with the fact that they have real armor protection, and then dealing with that extra firepower, focusing upon not just concealment, but actual cover. For the Marine, you have to worry about two things. One, anti-tank. This does actually have a more efficient anti-tank weapon than the shoulder-mounted ones. It can be built into squads that they have that anti-tank weapon. It is very similar, I would say, in, gauge to a crack missile from 40K, or a crack rocket, which, yeah, that will absolutely break the arm plate or damage the limb or possibly maim or wound, maybe even kill a Space Marine with a single shot. But in either case, getting hit by these is not something that you want. So knocking those guys out first, yes. Killing with the bolt gun, still absolutely possible. Killing with the chainsword, still absolutely possible. You gotta aim for the arms, legs, chest, whatever, but still doable. The biggest problem that I see with the B2 as opposed to the B1 is when you get close. There have been instances of the B2 grabbing people and literally throwing them around. B2s are clearly significantly more physically imposing and powerful than B1s. And as a Space Marine, you're no longer dealing with something that is of human strength or slightly less than human strength. You're dealing with something that is twice the strength of that. So, again, not necessarily the equivalent of Astartes, but definitely on a level where you'd be like, oh, that's not human anymore. That's beyond human strength. So, relative strength, if you tried to fight 2 or 3 of these and they started grabbing at you or trying to hook onto you, they're not unbelievably slow like the B2s are. They can manage some quick jerky motions on occasion. So if they started to grab at you or hook onto you, a couple of them could theoretically immobilize you, and then they might have the ability to bring up a weapon that can kill you or just blast away with you at blasters until they can break into a weak section of your armor, like an arm plate, a leg plate, or your stomach. So that's a concern. The Helldiver. Now, the biggest problem with the Helldiver is all of your light armor penetrating guns, throw them out. The B2 is not vulnerable. Now, you might initially be saying, well, isn't it just like the bots? They have a weak spot on the stomach too. Well, yes, but you gotta remember, the weak spot on the stomach for the B2 is not a weak spot in the way that it is for the bots. It's not dealing direct damage to the creature. It's just a flexible section covering over the spine that connects their arms to their legs. Now, you could split that, but it's a lot less of a chance of actually permanently downing the creature. You might knock it out or make it unable to move, but it's still dangerous, unlike the bots. So, in general, it is resistant with its armor to your normal guns. However, us Helldivers, we have a lot of weapons to pick from. Choose something with some decent armor penetration, and you are in basically the same boat as the guardsmen. Aim accurately, aim well, and you'll be able to take these out. Same problem again with the damage, but with the big advantage here being that these guys are relatively normal to us Helldivers. We fight bots all the time, and there are plenty of bot creatures that are very similar to the B2 in their actual design. There are less weak spots on the B2, as mentioned, but there are still weak spots. For the modern soldier, you have every single disadvantage against the B2. The biggest advantage that you have is that the B2 is dumb and it is slow, so as with all of the other creatures in this, you can probably run rings around it, but it's armored more than 5.56 is going to deal with, and most of the joints are too thick for 5.56. Durability, you have to destroy more of it than you would with a normal human. You have to absolutely pour rounds into this thing to really do a lot of damage, and you're probably only going to be able to truly disable it. And now you have something that also has near fully automatic fire. Oh boy, that's much more of a difficult ask than the B1. So you can see that the difficulty spike for droids goes way up for some factions, and then not really moving at all for some other factions. So the modern soldier would really struggle against the B2. Putting one of these down with a standard rifle would be incredibly tough. You would have to rely on explosives, squad automatic weapons, or really just sheer dumb luck trying to knock this thing out with attrition. Honestly, I would rely upon having a lighter anti-tank weapon, something like a 50 cal, like a Barrett 50 cal, an anti-materiel rifle, a high-powered sniper rifle, or just a good old Ma Deuce M2 50 cal would probably shred the B2 in quick order. But if you didn't have that, you would have a very difficult time knocking, especially one of the big boys, out with just a 5.56 rifle. It'd be very, very hard. Commando droids! Talking about guys who are really difficult to get rid of. General purpose for the commando droids: infiltration, mobility warfare, flexibility of higher quality material and gear. Essentially, the idea is because you're putting so much more effort into the commando droid, you want them to have better equipment and better gear. Even though they have the same exact rifle as all of the other droids, they also have other special equipment. Their relative cost per unit, not including the weaponry, is 10 times that of a B1. That's a lot. That's 10 times the cost. It's still a middling cost. You can still field whole squads of these things. Not massive armies, but squads, large squads, 10 or 20 at a time. That's not a bodyguard, that's a spec ops unit. That's really what they are. They can be snipers, they can be infiltrators, they can be melee combatants, they can be close combat specialists, they can be jump boys. They can do all different types of jobs, which is one of the things that makes them so expensive. That more complicated droid brain, that more articulated, higher quality body. I love the fact that it looks like it has wood accents, but I believe that's supposed to be a thermal resistant layer or something of that nature. What is the primary armament? Well, obviously they have the normal blaster. They also have modified blasters. They have sniper rifles. They have various levels of spec ops gear, from shields to grapplers to rappels to jetpacks. And one of the most classic and most important ones is the vibroblade. The vibroblade is really dangerous. It's honestly the most deadly weapon that we've seen thus far. It is a high-speed vibrating sword that parts through materials using the essentially harmonic speed of the blade to split apart atoms at a very low, tight level. This makes it able to slide through materials that it really shouldn't cut through really easily, and it also allows it to engage with weapons like lightsabers, or in the case of 40k, let's say that it would engage similarly to an adamantium sword with power weapons. So vibroblades are pretty important. They can do a lot of damage, they can penetrate a lot of armor. So, what do we need to consider when we are fighting commando droids? For the guardsmen, be aware of the slipperiness. These guys are stealthy. They are not designed for straight up assault. They are basically the dead opposite of all these mindless droids that have been running at you in waves. They are spooky, they are stealthy, and they are smart. And because of that, they're not sent on general tasks like kill people or grab an area. They have a unique focus. If you can work around that, that's a very effective way to counter them. If you know that they want to grab intelligence or infiltrate a base, finding ways to get ahead of them and booby trap their entrance or ambush them in some way, solid option as a guardsman. They are a little bit more armored than the B1, but they are not as armored as the B2. So if you hit them in many of the joints, if you hit them in the chest with the las gun again, I would say 6 shots just to be sure that you penetrate and do the necessary damage to destroy this thing. Again, your laser weapons are not exploding upon contact, so you're having to melt into it, but this is also a robot. There's very few unnecessary things in the robot, so damaging anything will do a certain amount of damage to its overall functionality as the guardsman. As the Space Marine, the biggest concern that you have is the fact that these guys have access to explosives and spec ops gear. Obviously, just be aware of that, be afraid of it, and be concerned about it. Kill the ones that have those with ranged weapons first. The other concern that you have is vibroblades. Because they have the vibroblades, and because those can effectively breach your armor quite easily, I might add, these are enemies that you're actually going to have to take consideration of when it comes to melee combat. You can't just grab them and rip them apart or throw them around. They'll take your hand off. So having an idea of like chainsword in one hand, bolt gun in the other hand, I'm not sure how the vibroblade would interact with a chainsword. I'm going to be 100% clear. It probably would engage with the teeth and then start jerking and juddering as the blade moved. I do not think that it would cut right through the chainsword, mostly because the blades of the chainsword are incredibly dense, which is a material that generally the vibroblade would struggle with. So I think it would be a very complicated thing, very similar to fighting a power weapon with a chainsword, but I've already gone over how that can be done effectively in other videos, specifically in the energy and in the chain blade videos. So those are your main 2 concerns. They have an armor-piercing weapon that is relatively common, and then they have consistent use of armor-piercing or relatively dangerous explosive weapons. As a Helldiver, this is a Spec Ops v Spec Ops scenario. You guys both have specific goals and objectives. They might be counter to each other, they might not be counter to each other. If you guys can pass like 2 ships in the night, fine. You do your job, you leave them to go clank another day. But there's also a problem here. Helldivers are often replaced. They do not have a long shelf life on the battlefield, and as a result, many Helldivers are relatively fresh. They are simply ideologically driven individuals who have experienced some or another type or amount of life. That means that theoretically there could be a pretty massive skill gap between the commando droid and the average Helldiver. Now, if you're John Helldiver, or if you're some other elite, General Brash or something like that, commando droids eat them for breakfast. They're just like any other clanker, but these guys are very different from the automatons. They are flexible, they are fast, they are dynamic, they are far more intelligent than even the most intelligent of normal clankers. So, in this scenario, there is a massive gap between the theoretical possibilities. The Helldiver has a lot of weapons that can penetrate armor. They have fully automatic weapons. They have melee weapons in some cases. None of them are up to the level of vibroblades, though, so dueling a commando droid is not a good idea, but you could theoretically do so. But, again, think of the skill gap, consider what your mission priority is, and if you can avoid engaging with commando droids, you probably should. Because the only way that you're really going to get rid of them quickly is by overwhelming them with sheer firepower from medium armor-penetrating weapons. The modern soldier. Now, the speed of this new enemy and the danger of complacency are your biggest concerns. Up to this point, you've faced enemies that are tough, you've faced enemies that are complicated and new, you haven't faced anything this fast before. And the commando droids are fast, and they're smart. Which means that not only is it dangerous to stick to normal procedure and hold in a defensive position and try and overwhelm the enemy with fire, because they will pass through that fire and likely be able to attack you at close range where you cannot effectively put them down, but the other thing is the danger of complacency. In the modern day, or really in the 1990s, we had the idea that if you were not part of a direct offensive or an aggressive action, a mounted light machine gun and a standard rifle could take care of and remove all enemy threats or insurgents. The commando droid would run essentially directly against this concept. They would literally test the amount of protective work that you do, and they would make it very, very hellish to try and hold a defensive position within an occupied zone. And it's one of the reasons that commando droids make such effective assassins is because little independent teams of them can come in and just wipe out entire bases of people. And against the modern soldier circa 1990, that was way more effective and dangerous than it would be today. So being complacent, not keeping your protective posture up is going to really hurt you against the commando droid for sure. On to our last two, Droidekas and Magna Guards. So, the general purpose of these two, and I've combined them together because they have a similar level of difficulty. High flexibility and high defense pseudo-vehicles in the case of the Droideka. I kind of call them pseudo-vehicles because they don't really work like droids. They work more like a spider droid. They're designed as a weapons-carrying beast that is also shielded. And for the Magna Guards, they are elite bodyguards. Now, I eyeballed the amount of value cost, but in comparison to the commando droid, the Droideka is probably about 100 times as expensive. So, whatever it is, 10,000 times as expensive as a standard B1, I would argue that's reasonable, because not only does it have two very high power, heavier laser weapons, it also has a much more complicated design, being able to both roll and ambulate around on 3 legs in a very stable platform, and projects its own shield. Shields within Star Wars are not incredibly common, at least on the personal level. They do exist, but they are not universal. So again, it acts more like a vehicle than it acts like infantry. For the Magna Guards, they are elite bodyguards, and theoretically they can be assassins or bounty hunters or anything like that. I think, the IG-88s, comparison to the Magna Guards, they could be one or another type of thing. Magna Guards as like a class of droid are probably well over 100,000 times more expensive than a standard B1, so incredibly expensive, very hard to get your hands on, because these are essentially full human analog droids. They're not just complicated, they're not just well-armed, they're not just expensive, they are designed to be human-level intelligent and human-level capable in terms of combat ability. Now, they're not unique or special or have human personalities or anything. Programming's fairly simple, but in terms of combat ability and in terms of like a battlefield acuity, you can consider them on par with the human, unlike the Droideka, which is a lot less intelligent. So, primary armament. It's various. The big thing with the Droidekas is that they have the 4 heavy laser cannons, and because they are in a bubble, it's hard to really do anything about them. There are also versions of the Droideka that have like a sniper rifle that can be used against light vehicles, but generally they lack anti-tank capacity, generally. However, for the Magna Guard, since they are again that human analog, they can use anything. We mostly see them with electro staffs, just because they're used to kind of get rid of Jedi or kill them or just torture people, I guess. But other than the staffs, because they're human, they can use all different types of materials. They can use light whips. They can use lightsabers, again, in theory. Not very well, but they can probably use them. They can use blasters, we know that. They can operate vehicles, absolutely. So they can essentially be built to task. Again, beyond just being bodyguards, now talking about being bounty hunters or their own individual things like IG-88 assassin droids are able to. So, for the guardsmen, what do we have to consider about these guys? For the guardsmen, for the Droideka, the shields and the firepower are your primary issue. The best way to get around the Droidekas is exactly the same way that they get around them in Star Wars. Explosives or kinetic impact. You can get through the shield and shoot the Droideka. If you're an Imperial Guardsman, tossing a smoke grenade or tossing a grenade or having your friends distract the Droideka, and then running up behind it, grabbing a frag grenade or grabbing your lasgun and then emptying it into the back of the creature's head or into the dome of its pelvis so it falls over and the shield deactivates, that's your best possible option. But that's still a very, very dangerous proposition because of the amount of firepower it has. It has the same or similar firepower to the weapons that you're going to be toting around as a light infantry regiment. Now, if you're a line infantry regiment, if you're a guardsman who has like a heavy bolter, I think there's a pretty solid chance that you can actually take out the Droideka's shield, because it's shown that kinetic impacts do more damage to the Droideka's energy shield than energy impacts do. It seems to be able to absorb energy impacts, but not kinetic impacts as well. We see that when they like drop rocks on the thing and the shield doesn't protect it. It doesn't go right through, it actually knocks it out and then destroys the creature. So I'd say something in that range would probably do you just fine. Explosives would be my fallback. For the Guardsman's concerns on the Magna Guard, the real issue is its speed. The fact that it is faster than you, the fact that it does not get tired, the fact that it has an extra brain in its chest and an extra set of eyes in its chest, so blowing its head off doesn't kill it. It's very durable, it's incredibly quick. If it gets close to you, you are screwed. It can be hunting you, which is a very different situation from basically every other droid. So the mentality definitely switches from the hunter to the hunted. However, even with the Magna Guard's armor and protection, it is a relatively large target in comparison to something like the B-1, and many of its more delicate joints are still vulnerable to the lasgun, not to mention the heavier weapons that an Imperial Guard squad will be towing along with them. For the Space Marines, the issue isn't necessarily the firepower of the Droideka, which is still a concern. Again, we could consider it the equivalent of something like a multi-laser, which is a threat to a Marine. You don't want to stand in the way of that type of laser, but it's not so much that I would risk just not running at it or anything. The shields are the biggest problem. They can likely stop bolt rounds. I don't think you would be able to knock it out with one magazine. Probably would need a second. You're not carrying a heavy bolter around, you're carrying a bolt gun. But its sheer toughness is also an issue. Cutting through it with your chainsword, chopping it apart, you're probably going to have to take a couple of swings at it, at which point it could theoretically damage you through that. Then, for the Magna Guard, the real issue is going to be melee. The fact that this creature is geared for melee combat, the fact that it is designed to be just as fast, just as capable, and just as intelligent as a human being, means that you're up against an enemy with similar physical capabilities to you, that doesn't feel pain, exhaustion, that is very strong, that is very physically capable in comparison to a human being. The Marine is up against a near peer in the Magna Guard. Now, it isn't actually peer, it isn't as good as the Marine, but it's a near peer. It's close. And if the Magna Guard was equipped with enough good equipment, they could probably be the equal of a Space Marine. But on a one-to-one basis, the Marine is still likely going to be able to knock down the Magna Guard without too much difficulty. I would just say stay away from them and shoot them as much as you can. And then if they end up getting close, you're probably better off trying to grapple with it than trying to actually fight it in combat, because it is very willing to give off pieces of its body, like limbs, in exchange for possibly killing you. Again, this is assuming it's equipped with a weapon that can penetrate your armor, which, if you're fighting Space Marines, yeah, you absolutely wouldn't use the stupid electro stick. You'd be using something far more dangerous, like a lightsaber, a light whip, or even a couple of vibroblades. For the Helldiver, everything just got a hell of a lot harder. The Droidekas, shit, man. Energy shields, you're mixing the bots and the Illuminate now. That's rough. And the energy shield for the Droideka is not as easy to penetrate as the energy shields are for the Illuminate. It's a lot smaller, it's a lot tighter, it's more energy efficient, and it can resist many of the energy weapons that we have. Sorry, double-edged sickle guys, you're literally not able to do anything. So that's tough, difficult. There are kinetic weapons that you have that are an option. I would say heavy machine guns are probably your best pick. Maybe even the emplacement or a gun dog. But even if you get that, this is more of an industrial type creature, so damaging it is going to require explosives. A good option might be to knock the shields out and then give it a recoilless rifle shot. Or, another option, call in artillery on this. There is no shame in blowing this thing up with a stratagem. It's what they do 90% of the time in the Clone Wars, is when these things show up, they either hit it with ship-grade weapons, you know, your orbital stratagems, or they blow it up or destroy it by knocking something on top of it. So, best option for them is just call in a stratagem. For the Magna Guards, oh boy, nothing moves this fast in game. Nothing moves this fast in game, and they are unbelievably smart and terrifying, and they will rip you apart in melee. Your best option, again, is plasma weapons, high armor penetrating weapons, because you need to penetrate that armor, and high damage. The Purifier, the Scorcher, all good picks, but even the lasers are probably not a good option against the Magna Guard. They overheat. Heavy weapons against the Magna Guard is okay, but it's fast, so you'll want something that's like legit hit scan and not reliant on good accuracy. Maybe the Quasar Cannon or the Laser Cannon would be your best option here. But yeah, either way, very, very difficult for you. The Modern Soldier, we're not even talking about just doing normal things here. Both of these will require support weapons. Mortars, heavy machine guns, or grenade launchers. No exceptions. There's no way around it. You need support weapons to overcome these. The Magna Guard, however, is far more dangerous if it just picks up a gun. If the Magna Guard has a blaster, you're in a much worse situation. Your bullets are bouncing off of this thing, and it is fast, it is smart, it is taking cover, it is flanking around your position. Every time it jumps up and shoots, it kills somebody basically 50% of the time. Your squad's getting wheedled down as you try and pin this bastard down and knock out the cover that it's using. It's difficult to consistently knock one of these things out, and it kind of works like the Terminators from, Skynet. It has that crunching onward move, except it's a lot faster, and if it picks up a firearm, it becomes far more deadly, and I see no reason as to why they would not have a firearm. The other thing is, this is versus the Droideka's brain. Yes, the Droideka has a shield, but there's a lot of kinetic and explosive weapons that we have as the Modern Soldier that the others don't have. So the Droideka brain, the fact that it isn't smart, the fact that it isn't nearly as fast when it's actually able to fire, when it's rolling, open fire on it, doesn't have a shield. But when it is shield up, it's rather slow. It's tic-tacking along on its three little legs. Get the 40 mic out and just absolutely obliterate it with 40mm grenades. Empty the 50 cal into it. Have all of your men essentially empty whatever grenades they have into the Droideka, and you will likely be able to knock it off its feet and thus disable it. Again, you still have to deal with the problem that you're trying to break industrial equipment with essentially bullets, but it can be done. And considering how difficult the Magna Guard is for the Modern Soldier, the Droideka is a little tiny step down. So, I hope that you guys enjoyed. It was an absolute pleasure to do this. I always like getting back to Star Wars content. As usual, credit goes to Lucasfilm and to Wolfdog Art, who did the cover for this video. This is a part 2 and kind of more experimental as far as series go. we always try and do new things here, and this was one of the requests that I got on the last video, and I kind of expanded it because people were looking into it. I may do more comparative reviews in future. I like comparing across genres that I enjoy, so let me know if you enjoyed that. But other than that, I wish you all a lovely good night.